Welcome to Alpha Centurion. I'll be your guide. So I'd like to talk about the Candece Owens debate, the great Catholic debate, as she calls it, between her husband, George Farmer, and I believe it's Allie Beth Stuckey. The comments are going to be short. I might one day go through their questions or at least Beth Stuckey's objections, but I have way too much stuff filmed that I have yet to edit, so who knows if I will ever get to that. What I want to talk about is kind of how people are throwing Beth Stuckey under the bus. So I've seen her show a few times. When I've watched Beth Stuckey's show, I've noticed that she's aiming for a specific audience, and she's very strong and very staunch in her beliefs, and she'll sometimes overstate things. And maybe some of that style pulled into this debate, okay? But one of the complaints that I've heard, and while I have heard a little bit from the Catholic side, I've heard a lot more from the Protestant side. And a lot of them are upset with her for asking very low tier, very low bar questions and having low bar objections that are not only straw men, but go against what some of the arguments the reformers made against Catholicism. And I want to defend Allie Beth Stuckey just a little bit here. Mind you, I am a Catholic. I have very strong objections to Calvinism. And one of the things that a lot of people, especially a few prominent Protestant commentators, not so much apologists, were saying that, well, no Protestant believes what she just said, either for Candece or for Allie Beth Stuckey. And no Protestant would say these things to a Catholic. That's not true. I'm currently in my 40s, and since I was 15 years old, I've heard some of those objections at least once a year. Usually it's from a Baptist, but I also have heard it from other Christian Protestants. So let's go through what I usually hear. They will say, well, no Catholic has ever been saved because they're not even Christian. And then you say, well, what about this part of church history? And they'll say, well, that wasn't really the real church because the Catholic Church was founded by Constantine. And I've heard this a lot. And you hear this too. You want to insult is what ends up happening, is you want to insult them for not being more educated on the Catholic claims. But I think that's unfair. And I'll say why in an instant, but I think it's unfair to expect two normal people who, even if they're celebrities, or even if they're wealthy, who are not theologians, to know this stuff. I'm Catholic. I left the church at 15. I didn't go back to the church until 33, but I've read the Bible at this point, who knows how many times. But when I first started this channel, I had read the Bible 3 times. I had read through the Catechism. I had read Volume 1 of the collection of documents from Vatican II. And I went to church every Sunday when I was a kid, all the way to 13. And when I started talking religion on this channel, I had gone back to church already for about a year or 2 years. So I was very familiar with the Bible. And still, I said a lot of liberal, crazy things on this channel that I have not taken down those videos, but I put them out there. I put those thoughts out there before I started reading the Church Fathers to see how my views would change. And by reading the Church Fathers, my views became more traditional and more orthodox. And I don't agree with almost any of my liberal views when it comes to theology. Any of my liberal theological views that I had before I read the Church Fathers. So why would someone expect two normal people debating each other on religion when that's not their specialty to know these things? I've been doing this now for 5 years, and I've debated Protestants and Baptists and Orthodox and debated Calvinists now, and I've debated lots and lots of atheists. and your arguments start to get more refined the more you do it, the more you practice debating, the more research you do. I've read through the church fathers. I read all the ancient church fathers, and right now I'm reading on first principles from Origen, and it's a lot of stuff. I've gone back and I've read the Bible again. I read it more times, and I've also compared different translations and read a lot of study stuff. And still, I'm learning more and more every time I open up a church father, a church father's book, a church father's writings. So and I'm not calling Origen a church father. I know that's controversial in its own right. I do not expect Candece Owens, whose specialty is politics, or Allie Beth Stuckey, who's a Calvinist, to understand Catholic claims. But I do think that their performance and the criticism both interlocutors and the host is getting, I think does show that you do need to know the arguments before you step into debates. So one of the things that I do, and I'm not the greatest debater in the world. You can watch all my debates. They're all on here on YouTube, and some of them I'm perform well, and then I'll get hit up by, there'll be one question that will oh, I didn't quite understand what they asked, or I'll misunderstand what they're saying because they say things in a way that I haven't heard before. And as a Catholic, I don't have chapter and verse memorized. I can tell you that once you start reading it, I can then verbatim say the rest of the line, or even the rest of the paragraph. But if you just give me the book and the verses, I'm like, well, tell me what it says, right? Okay. So I get all that. And there was a point in the debate where Allie Beth Stuckey tried to call out Catholics on that, saying, well, they don't know the Bible. And it's like, no, they don't know line and verse and chapter and verse, but that doesn't mean they don't know the actual words of the verse. But I think we should need to be more charitable, because when I do debates, when I go to open rooms, I hear these same questions. I hear these same objections to Catholicism. I hear these same misrepresentations of the reformers from Protestants and from atheists. People don't know what Martin Luther said, but I've read through them. I read through them multiple times. I've done a satirical video on it, and I've done a serious video on it. I have Calvinist commentaries, and I have Baptist commentaries, and I have different religions or different denominations commentaries. So I know what they think, and I know what their real arguments are against Catholicism. So that way, when I'm debating a Protestant who's of a certain denomination, I know what they believe. But you have to know what the arguments are. And Allie Beth Stuckey demonstrated she doesn't know the arguments. And so you just have these memorized talking points, but you don't have the substance of it to where you can turn it into your own thought, and you can explain what the objection is and what the counterpoint is. Yeah, you're going to look bad. That's because you haven't thought that out, and you're having an open debate between two people who haven't done this for 5 years, or some apologists 20 years or 15 years or 10 years. Yeah, they're not going to look as polished, because they're not. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't have the conversation. And I think a baseline conversation like this between common misconceptions is good. Because when you watch a debate between someone at my level versus someone like found cause, but we're not talking at the level of, let's say, Jimmy Akin versus Gavin Ortlund. Okay? Well, our audience, the audience that we are drawing in, is the audience that's at that level. But you do have a general audience that doesn't know any of this stuff, both Protestant and Catholic, Baptist and, let's say, Lutheran, who haven't been well catechized. Maybe they've only heard the Bible in church and they haven't actually read it. Maybe they only know, maybe they're atheists who only know the Bible from what they understood as a child, haven't dived into it again since then, and they know what movies and TV shows and kind of like the common culture says about what it says. And that's something that Allie Beth Stuckey did, is she was repeating really strong talking points from people who have done more research, but she didn't know what the context of that research was or why those comments were said. She just knew the memorized talking points. And I don't think we should fault her for that. Like I said, the common objection that I get to the Catholic Church is that Constantine founded it. They don't have context for what the actual debate is. What's the actual debate on whether or not Peter's the first pope? The questions are not the ones that Allie Beth Stuckey was coming in. So you have this debate, and you have to know what the topic is. You have to know what the argument is for and against the position that you're holding. If you don't know the argument, you're just going from your own assertions and own perceptions and maybe even some misunderstandings. And hey, look, like I said, on my channel, I've made the same kind of mistakes. When I'm first learning Protestant points of view, I did not have a sophisticated take on their understanding. And even listening to Protestant pastors and Baptist pastors and Calvinist pastors, it didn't really sink in until I discovered Gavin Ortlund, until I discovered Matt Whitman, until I discovered Jordan Cooper. Those were Protestants who were speaking to me, who I could understand what they were saying. If I was just going based on James White and Anderson and only listening to Mike Winger and Alan Parr, I would have a very low opinion of Protestantism. And most Protestants don't understand historic Protestantism. That's not where they're coming from. They're coming from an American evangelical fundamentalist point of view, just to defend Miss Owens and just defend Allie Beth Stuckey. Even if their misconceptions seem silly to you and don't, for you, speak to the whole of Protestantism, there are a lot of Protestants who actually do think that way. And maybe even the majority of Protestants who are ill-informed or are not well studied in the history of the church hold these point of views because they hear someone like James White, who sounds very authoritative, who sounds very sure, and they take his jabs to be the facts, instead of understanding them as jabs against the church and not facts against the church. That can happen. They could maybe only listen to I remember I used to listen to a preacher at 6 a.m. on TV. And you just kind of go, I guess that's what this kind of church believes. And it was very entertaining, but it's not actually historical Protestantism. It's just TV evangelism, televangelism. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. Peace, like, and subscribe.